From a really early age, I was allowed to just cut about on my bike. I had a real sense of autonomy. And then when I got a little bit older and I could explore a little bit further by bike, that felt really exciting. This idea that I could completely self-supported get into these hills that, you know, had been in the distance as a child. It was a real light bulb moment to realise just the power and the freedom and the joy of self-propelled transport. Falling into racing was a bit of a mistake, actually, and I'd done some quite big things on some hills, probably in places that bikes shouldn't be, and I'd got this sort of understanding that I was capable and strong, and so when a local race just came to near where I lived in Inverness, I kind of entered just to see, and was really surprised at how well I did. And then I just got caught up in the curiosity of the whole thing. I was like, okay, well, if I've never trained before and I can win a race, then what would happen if I've trained? And my goal was to race at the Glasgow 2014 Commonwealth Games. And the year before that, I became the British mountain bike champion. And while you're getting better at something, it's very hard to step off. And it just kind of went in that direction without me really noticing. And before I knew it, I guess quite a lot of the joy, like the reason that I'd started using a bike, had started to seep out. I just knew that that was going to be the end of racing in that way. And that was when I decided, right, let's get back to the whole point of mountain biking for me in the first place, which was the self-supported journeying aspect. And sometimes that's under race conditions. So I'll still race, but you know, my distances, instead of, you know, an hour and a half sprinting around a field, it's now 500 miles, sometimes 3,000 miles. Competitive sport gives you a structure, and that is really helpful. That was really helpful to me. There's something really satisfying about waking up every day and just knowing what I had to do on a bike, and that was just like my single focus, and I was very content and happy in those sort of training phases. But it's also a really brutal place to form a set of values, like you win or you lose, and that is it. And I'm not sure how healthy that is in the long term if you don't have like a foundation of self-worth already. Like if you don't know ultimately that you're a good and strong and competent person, then if you balance all of your self-worth on whether or not you're going to win or lose a race, then that's a pretty dangerous place to be. Racing is fun. It can be fun. It's just about doing it if it makes you tick, but then keeping it in perspective. And I think that's what mountains do. They keep it all in perspective. Like, you can't take yourself too seriously when you're surrounded by this. So I did a degree in outdoor education and then a postgraduate training in child and adolescent psychotherapy. And I brought those two things together to set up a project called Psychotherapy that worked one-to-one with boys, almost exclusively boys, 14, 15-year-old boys who'd been excluded from school for behavioural reasons. They didn't want to sit still. Like, they didn't want a one-to-one session with a school counsellor. They needed to be out there. So we would build bikes together initially, just get to know each other, and then we rode bikes together. And it wasn't formal therapy, but just this idea that we were outside journeying together on bikes in open green space, that was therapeutic in and of itself. And then almost inevitably, conversations would happen on the way to or the way back from a mountain bike trail where, you know, they would tell me what was going on. But that wasn't the point. Like, the point was them just having that freedom, nobody telling them what they had to do, no one trying to force them into a box. And just that release seemed to be enough and was really worthwhile. Society's not really set up to accept alternative pathways to different sorts of excellence. We've got a very narrow idea of what being successful is, what winning looks like. Everyone's under loads of pressure to succeed and to stand on their own 2 feet, but not all of us have got the choices to do that in healthy and sustainable ways. I would have had a much better time if I'd realised earlier on that I didn't need to try so hard. That I wanted everything to be perfect and I wanted to try really hard and give it my all so that I had no regrets. But actually, a lot of the time I was putting myself under unnecessary pressure. And I worry about that for our kids. Like, I see them in sport, I see them in education, and they're freaking out. I'm just like, oh, relax, look up, have perspective. it's all going to be okay. You don't need to try as hard as you're trying.